That'll be $70, please. Alright, you've seen the thumbnail, you know what's up, so let's get straight to it. Games have kinda gotten worse. Most of the video games out there are still doing good, but it's pretty clear that some could be doing better. And since discussions for this topic are dying down, I might as well put my 2 cents in real quick. So without a doubt, the games with the biggest decline are definitely third-party games, and it's easy to see why. They're still the annual sports games, but they've been growing more greedy with their monetization practices. Before, they used loot boxes, but after they were banned, they started forcing unskippable ads in a game that's already full-priced, and as far as I know, they're still doing this with NBA 2K games. Lots of games also emphasize in-game currencies through microtransactions, specifically with cosmetics and battle pass systems. This is more prominent in free-to-play live service games as those are their only forms of profitability. But you'll also see a few paid live service games that still charge for battle passes and cosmetics. The longevity of these games are also inconsistent, as your purchased items are completely at risk of being lost forever if the game shuts down. I've already made a whole video on those, so I won't go any further. Just know that the monetization practices can be pretty scummy sometimes. The overall game quality of third-party titles has also seen better days. Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad simply don't live up to the Batman Arkham trilogy. Overwatch's sequel was somehow worse than its predecessor. Newer titles from Battlefield and Call of Duty still haven't reached the popularity or even the quality of their older games. Whether it's due to the stagnant gameplay, lacking visual design, or just less polish all around, third-party games have certainly been better. It's clear that most games are focused on higher profits rather than the enjoyment a game can bring, which is really unfortunate since the potential of certain IPs could have made some really great games. Overwatch 2 should have been an easy win. Gotham Knights and Suicide Squad had a solid formula to follow. The cancelled Wonder Woman game would have been nice to see, and Multiverses had an amazing opportunity in its hands. But unfortunately, corners were cut, studios were shut down, and projects were cancelled. There could be many reasons for each of those examples, but it's safe to assume that money was a big factor in their failures, and things could have gone better. The current console generation also hasn't been the best. This isn't about games specifically, but I think it relates close enough and probably factors into the lesser quality we've been seeing. And again, I've already made a video related to this, so I'll go over this quickly. Just looking at the current generation overall, it's easy to see a slow and slightly lacking console lineup. Now, first-party games are mostly solid in quality, but the output of these games is kind of slow. With all the cross-gen releases as well, these newer consoles had a bit of a weak start to their libraries. And even now with most exclusives jumping to PC, it just feels less significant owning one of the new consoles. First-party games also take longer to make than they did in the past, with bigger budgets, more ambition, and a lot more to consider when making a big AAA title. But even with a larger scale, some of the first-party stuff can be a bit underwhelming as well. Xbox's bigger titles like Starfield and Halo Infinite definitely didn't do as good as we all expected. PlayStation's got a few blunders with their continuous live service push and questionable remasters. It's not like every previous generation was perfect, but this one seems a lot less fulfilling than it probably should have been. It's just kinda shallow in some areas. And with Nintendo's new console coming around, they've been leaning a lot more on remakes and remasters that sometimes aren't worth their price point. There's also their newest Mario Kart title costing a baffling $80, and their little tech demo game for the Switch 2 is a paid game, not a free pack-in. Their new upgrade packs for older games are also paid upgrades, unlike the PS5's free upgrades for certain PS4 games. It's just undeniably greedy, and there's a chance they can change it before the games drop, but this is Nintendo we're talking about. They never drop their prices. And looking past the games themselves, we also have the companies and developers not exactly doing too well. I'm pretty sure we've all heard of the layoffs hitting the games industry, and unfortunately it's practically unavoidable by every studio on the map. Xbox laid off employees, PlayStation's done the same, third-party companies have followed suit, and even some indie teams were hit with layoffs. And initially, I thought this was a product of 2020's pandemic. Most game companies probably overstaffed during quarantine, and now they're cutting down the fluff to get back on track. But after 5 years, we're still seeing layoffs, so what's going on? I'm 90% sure it's just big game companies cutting corners to save on their profits. When an obviously bad game tanks in sales, instead of taking the financial hit in the company altogether, the head honchos just cut off some employees to save on their million-dollar bonuses. But at the same time, even some indie teams had to lay off some staff, and I doubt some small indie team has a CEO earning millions. So regardless of the team or company, layoffs are just the result of poor sales. But it's how a game company handles those sales that matters. Some game companies just have unrealistic goals set for them, and when they go all in expecting a game to sell millions, they begin laying off employees or shutting down studios to keep their money up. Other teams may approach lesser sales by downscaling their games or by cost cutting through other means. Regardless, it's just a bad situation to deal with. Personally, I still blame greedy company leads for prioritizing their own profits over people's careers. But for small dev teams, sometimes layoffs are the only option, and that's a shame. While most indie teams are better off because they aren't at the mercy of some upper management, the games industry just isn't doing well in this aspect. At this point, thousands of employees within game development studios have lost their jobs. Or even worse, a full studio gets shut down. And I think Microsoft is probably the worst in this case. With their full acquisition of Activision Blizzard, they promised that they wouldn't mess with the companies under their acquisition. Come January 2024, they end up cutting 1,900 jobs from both Xbox and Activision Blizzard. So there goes nearly 2,000 jobs in an instant. I can only hope everyone who suffered through these layoffs have found a better job elsewhere. I think it's clear that video games have certainly seen better days. As the industry grows, things get more corporate, profits gain priority, and the passion of making games is slowly set aside. But that doesn't mean everything's bad. There's plenty of good parts in video games that have been doing well, or even improved over time. Although first-party games have been struggling in certain aspects, they've also been pretty solid with games like Astrobot, Helldivers 2, Tears of the Kingdom, God of War Ragnarok, and Mario Wonder. Some of the stuff PlayStation puts out there are truly unique experiences, with their realistic games and narratives reaching amazing levels of presentation. It's jaw-dropping, really. Nintendo just knows how to make some fun games for everyone. And Xbox, although they slip up more often than not, can put out some fun titles every now and then. I know I've thrown third parties under the bus so far, but some developers like Capcom, Square Enix, and Atlus have really put out some great stuff. Monster Hunter Wilds, Visions of Mana, Metaphor ReFantazio, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Persona 3 Reload are all high quality games deserving of their praise. And that's only from 3 development teams. There's probably more I can list with their own games, but I'm too lazy to cover that much. By far the biggest subset of video games, and possibly the best in my opinion, are the indie games. Indies have been growing non-stop ever since the last generation of consoles, and they certainly haven't slowed down either. If you're looking for something that first or third parties haven't covered, an indie game might have what you need. Looking for a new type of shooter? Neon White, Ultra Kill, and Super Hot are some good starters. How about some platformers? Pseudo Regalia, Gravity Circuit, and Celeste are all great picks. Well, what about horror games? Mouthwashing, Signalis, and Crow Country are some popular choices. Indie games also just take more risks and innovate more often than the usual AAA release. Cuphead is well known for its hand-drawn cartoon style, Balatro is addictive with its combination of poker and a roguelike, and UFO 50 is just 50 full-fledged games all in one package. Indies are so popular and widespread that they make up a good chunk of my game library at this point. They aren't perfect, but they've done well in offering some really fun games to play. But just looking back over a couple years, games have seen a noticeable downgrade in some areas. Lots of third parties still try to hit that live service jackpot, plenty of games just launch in unfinished states, and the first party stuff can be a bit lacking. The consoles we have could definitely be better, and the thousands of layoffs across the industry is kinda depressing. All of this certainly wasn't happening a decade ago, at least not to this scale. And when so many people begin to ask, are video games getting worse? I think that says a lot about the current status of games as a whole. At the same time though, a few different types of games have really seen a lot of growth. The first and third party teams can offer some amazing experiences you can't get anywhere else. Indies have also continued their rise in popularity through plenty of innovations, and show no signs of stopping either. But altogether, it's hard to deny that games have gotten worse to a certain extent. I don't know if that's just for this current generation, or just how things are going overall, but there's definitely a decline in quality here. If you compared some of the older Call of Duty games to some of the newer ones, you could probably tell that something's changed for the worse. But as for everything else, I'd argue that things are just different, or even improved in some cases. This is also kind of a subjective topic that doesn't really have a definitive correct answer. I might argue that microtransactions and live service games suck, but you might say that games such as Marvel Rivals, Helldivers 2, and MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV wouldn't be possible without it. You might despise some of the third-party games of this generation, but I could argue that they've also grown pretty well in terms of their scale and ambition with Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring. A lot of things change, both for better and for worse. Some games may be going through a rough patch, while others rise in quality. But even if you believe that games are getting worse, which I completely understand, there's still plenty of good titles out there to play. It's not like all video games have suffered similar downgrades. You might find something great in the indie scene, or maybe you overlooked a first-party game that could surprise you. Maybe more games are getting worse to you, but I can still think of a lot of good games to find and play. Either way, all we can do is hope that video games and the industry improve on what's failing and continue with what's working. And who knows, we might see those improvements when the next generation comes around. But that's just what I think of video games right now. Maybe you might agree with me, or maybe I have the worst opinion imaginable. I don't know, maybe this topic's already dead in the water and no one cares. But if you've watched this far, then I guess that isn't entirely the case. Anyways, if you enjoyed watching, subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you later. God, $80 for a Mario Kart game? That's like a GTA 6 price. That's gotta be a laid April Fool's joke, right? Right?